Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to another live stream. This one is specifically talking with respect to cladding. And yes, you'll notice there's a play on words. It's not just matters to do with cladding, but the fact that cladding does bloody matter. And doing it right, doing it wrong, and all the aspects in between are what's top of the pops at the moment from the point of view of discussions. Now, the topic we're covering today is a contentious one, so I'm fully expecting some flack after the fact. And I say to you all, bring it on. Today's topic is how can regulations be regulated? Hamish, as ever, I'm throwing you straight under the bus.
Well, let me first of all to everyone. Steve hasn't arrived with us yet, and he's the one in the biggest predicament. Silas, myself, and Gareth can only look at the situation that Steve and so many tens of thousands of other people have found their way in. Carrying out some research this week, a couple of interesting aspects sort of came to. In Australia, what they've actually sort of found, 10% of the population do actually live in flats. And what they're finding, because they want to get, they themselves want to get accommodation up and quick because their immigration is, it seems to be much higher than it was. And the best way for, it's a bit of a strange those that are actually going to Australia, immigrants, it has a not particularly the best of connotations when we speak about immigrants, but they are legal in Australia. There's no people voting in because it's not worth their while trying that there. However, what it's found is a greater proportion of immigrants living within those particular types of accommodation because it's a good way of accommodating them, and they see a massive increase. Their population is probably about 40% of the UK's. I'm not that clever. I'm not that sort of far up on it, but it's about sort of 40%. And they've got sort of something like over 2.5 million people living in flats, and they have challenges with cladding as well because they're looking seriously at it. But when you look into other research throughout the world, unfortunately, and particularly when we actually look into flats and that particular type of accommodation, it's more readily one of those aspects that a lot of things are going on that shouldn't be going on. It is regulated and it should be regulated. But how are those regulations being actually looked at and sort of maintained? And in particular, I mean, this subject keeps coming up. I look at building control, for example, and these are guys that I thought were regulating the performance of what was going on within the build sector. And in sort of, technically they are. However, they are, and I don't like putting labels on things, but somehow or other, when we look at the situation, and Silas spoken about this before, we look in the 60s, how all these particular buildings went up. Regulations were there, but somehow or other, these properties were built without actually applying the appropriate planning regulations that should have been accommodated. And this is the same thing that's happened. We've noticed this thing in Royal Artillery Quays, where in actual fact these properties were built there, but according to certain planning regulations. It was changed. Materials were changed. The way it was applied was changed. Fire risk materials. In fact, potentially, these things seem to be happening. And in a way, sort of being a sort of total sort of novice of such things, because I work on research to a totally different nature, and I didn't understand all of this was going on. And I mean, it's probably one of those things that Silas knows so much more about because of his experience in both buying, selling, and even sort of maintaining the sort of build and looking after the build of certain properties too.
Silas, welcome again. It appears to me that while we were all panicking about asbestos and panicking about this and panicking about overlooking other people and panicking about other forms of planning regulations, there's only recently that it's become de rigueur, and dare I say it, I know I'm going to get shouted at for this, fashionable to talk about cladding. And now we've got disasters to back up that fashion. This is just the tip of the iceberg, surely.
It does seem that way, Gareth. And I think one of the things that I'm beginning to understand about any part of life is that there's so much overlap and there's so much room, therefore, for other people to take accountability, or more importantly, to blame somebody else in the entire process. And if you look at the very nuts and bolts of building, you can have all the regulation that you want in the world, but if the boy or girl on the building site isn't following or adhering to that guidance, or is cutting corners, that's where we end up with a bit of a problem. And I think what's puzzling to me is acting in a way that is what I would describe as conscionable. And so we all know how some people act unconsciously. Okay, we see examples of that every day, right? Some people purposely act unconscionably by going to the local shop and stealing or whatever else it might be. But when you're in a position of producing a building material, is it the best building material that you can produce for the price that's, you know, a product's being retailed out at? And everybody will largely say yes. But then I look at the size of some of these companies, like Kingspan, for example, massive insulated panel manufacturer, huge organization. And I don't think it would cost that much more to ensure that the products that they're producing, for example, would be fireproof. And that's where I think we've taken our eye off the ball, is we've allowed profitability to supersede the whole idea of doing a job right because it's the right thing to do.
But it's a pence per panel difference. It's probably
Correct.
Small, but there are millions of panels. So therefore they're looking at it and thinking, well, we could, they're rubbing their little grubby little hands together and going, well, we could grab a few pence here and there. Is that really the discussion that's going on?
I can't see I couldn't say directly in boardrooms up and down the length and breadth of the country that's exactly what's going on, but it does seem very odd to me that you wouldn't sit there as a cladding manufacturer and go, do you know what happens if a building catches fire? And particularly since Grenfell, what happens if this material catches fire? Oh, well, we've put restrictions in place, and anybody connected with the building industry will know that when you go on a building site, there is a very high probability that somebody's going to cut corners. And therefore, do you have that belt and braces approach that when you're doing your sales process, because that's really what it comes down to, we have this panel over here, it's going to go up like a bonfire that's had gasoline poured over it. Or we've got this panel over here for £1 more that actually is completely inert and, it's completely fire retardant. There's never going to be an issue. That's going to save the lives of firefighters. That's going to save homeowners on the cost of insurance. Insurers are going to be happy all day long. To me, that would be a no-brainer for a project manager or a developer to then make the right choice.
But it appears to me that specifically, and we're going to come to Steve in a second, and thank you very much for popping in, Steve. But these so-called XPS panels that are on the side of this damn building in Artillery Quays, I'm not defaming the building, I'm defaming the builder. That they are effectively wrapping it in what amounts to little more than firelighters, and why they consider that it's a sensible thing to leave on a building. I mean, Steve, dare I say it? I'm going to jump to you now. Would it cost them that much more to go the extra mile to remove these last few panels and finish the damn job?
Yes. Well, basically, with our panels that they want to leave on, it was costed out by Capital, which was a company that looked at the remediation as a whole, and they worked out it was just £350,000 to remove all these panels. So it really is surprising that Barratt have taken this tough line to leave flammable, untested, unidentified panels on the fire shafts of 16-story towers, when the National Fire Chief Council have said combustible material should not be present anywhere on fire shafts, on the stairs, only method of escape for 16-story towers. Now, that's just to save £350,000 that Barratt of ignoring the Fire Chief Council, put 1,000 residents at risk, the fire brigade at risk, just to save that money. And the fact that the standard appears to be allowing untested product to stay on buildings that are at risk and that are banned on new buildings is the key problem. That standard needs to be upgraded.
Well, it just seems to me that it's all very well to say, look, going forward, lessons learned, we won't do this again. But we've got a whole host of people living in buildings with these things in there unremediated. Am I right in thinking that even after all the faff, they were supposed to start making initial remediation on your building in July?
That's right.
And we appear to be largely, July has disappeared up the Swanee a long time ago. We're now in September, damn it.
Well, the thing is, the building safety regulator has written to me and are very, very concerned at my findings that the so-called risk-based approach that allows banned materials to stay on existing buildings in these post-Grenfell remediation is being done without any test evidence to support any of the retained material is low risk. They have no idea if it's low risk. They don't pretend to understand if it's low risk. So how can you follow a risk-based approach without knowing what the risk is? And the other thing I would say is this remediation standard for these post-Grenfell buildings states in its own documentation that it cannot be used. This is an exclusive for the listeners here. The standard for post-Grenfell remediations cannot be used where the principal objective is a zero risk to life. So my question to the government is, what level of risk to life is acceptable for post-Grenfell remediations?
Yes, it's just how much death do you want? You only want 10% death, or maybe 50%, or maybe you're happy with 70% death. Let's kill most of them. It's laughable, isn't it? And
that's why the fire shaft has been compromised by this plan.
You see, the thing is, right? The fire shaft in this, it reminds me of a very old film called Logan's Run, and with people, with firemen, and their jobs were to make fires, not put them out. In this particular case, the fire shaft appears to be the best place to start a fire. We've actually had a comment while we've been talking from Christine Solved, who says, I don't know much about this, but the first question is, why suppliers and manufacturers are still allowed to produce anything that isn't fire retardant? Are they not legislated? This is criminal. How do you respond to that?
I mean, the point is if you don't have any mandated need for test evidence, they may claim there's fire retardant in it, but how does the product perform under a fire scenario? And there's full-scale test rigs they can test it on, especially for tall buildings. There's the 8414 test. They could do all of this, and they aren't. And the worst thing is it's banned on new material. So somebody has taken the view that this material really isn't safe and shouldn't be on buildings at all. Why is it then existing buildings doesn't really matter, and you don't need any fire test evidence?
I think they think that older people are more inherently fire retardant. That's what it is. Only younger people on the newer buildings, you see. Wow. It's absolutely ridiculous. I'm going to go straight back to you, Silas. Now, surely, Steve Paulsod, forgive me, Steve, you're stuck in it. You had to do this, otherwise, just to survive. The rest of us are looking on. So we need to sort of raise the standard, raise the flag, and get people like Lord Lytton to change the Earl of Lytton to make changes. Surely, what has to be done now?
And this is the ultimate question, isn't it? I'm not inherently a fan of government intervention or regulation per se. I think it's restrictive, but then we keep encountering scenarios like this where it needs to be brought to the fore, and that leads to elevated costs for absolutely everybody involved. So we have now a regulation and a standard that we have to meet. There is a cost involved in meeting that standard, in enforcing that standard, and across the board for everybody, because somebody has made the decision not to do the right thing in the first place, to then go off and then start, it causing massive inconvenience for everybody. And of course, Steve's situation here is absolutely dreadful. Where you've got residents there in a building that is highly flammable and with virtually no means of escape. Let's tell it as it is. That's effectively what's going on, and I think it's abhorrent, and I think it's tragic that nobody is stepping in at a level to solve this as a matter of extreme urgency.
What occurs to me, I mean, look, you picked on the human life aspect. No means to escape, highly flammable. But to me, I'm also looking at the preventative. A waking watch is, to me, it's like putting a sticking plaster on a gaping wound. This whole business of saying, well, we can do little bits, but not the whole lot. It just seems to me to be an unethical approach to the whole process.
I think that's the underlying word, isn't it? Unethical. And I defy anybody who's in our position to sit there and go, actually, we would do exactly what Barrett are doing here. I defy anybody to agree with that position. I really do.
What they're doing is, as Steve's already said, is they've made it. They've made the building slightly less flammable than it was before. It's like we won't pour petrol on it this time. We'll just put a little bit of oil at the bottom, just for good measure.
I think one of the other issues here is where's the accountability to the individual, not the company. And that is, again, what I see time and time again in many different practices, in many different organizations. There's no individual accountability. You look at a local authority that it's about to go bankrupt because they've spent all the money. Well, who's made those decisions? There's nobody accountable. And again, the same with, I'm sure Steve's frustrations dealing with Barrett is that you're probably passed from pillar to post and nobody wants to be accountable or hold the flag and say, do you know what, it's on me. It's my responsibility. I'll deal with it, and I'll deal with the consequences. And that's I think, endemic across most of society at the moment, unfortunately.
Hamish, my dear friend, we've both been around the block enough to see these sort of disasters. Would you unmute yourself? Sorry. We've both been around the block enough to see these sort of things. I mean, if I dare point a small parallel to the post office scandal, it was only when they started pointing fingers at the individuals involved that we started getting radical action. Would you agree?
Very, very much so. I mean, it's strange we have this situation on. And of course, the thing is, Steve has got to know the names of the people who should be held responsible, but they're very evasive. And they are themselves not responding to the questions that Steve is answering, asking for the appropriate, has this been tested? What's your view? They won't actually respond, although they've admitted that they have been incompetent as an organization with the sloppy type of building. They've accepted that particular fact. They've even accepted the fact that it is risk. It has fire risk, and the materials they are using have fire risk. And okay, they might try, as we said before, they might be suggesting it is minimal, but it comes into this regulated sort of idea. It's just somehow or other, the people that should be held responsible are not. And when you look at it, and this is a sad aspect of what's going on in Grenfell, and you think that's taken 7 years. I mean, heaven forbid, we've had further tragedies, subsequent to that particular time. It's taken 7 years. They've come out now with a report from Grenfell, and they're actually sort of saying now, well, okay, we've been kicking the bucket around sort of for 7 years. It's going to take another 2.5 to 3 years to get the person responsible, and we can actually point the finger at them. Something that the Earl of Lytton's actually trying to do and trying to introduce, along with some of the great work that Steve's doing, is to actually take away all this stupidity, get it completely out of the way and say, look, you screwed up. You made a mess of what you did in the first place. Get that mess sorted.
But Hamish, if I build a building and a number of years later, a number of defects make themselves apparent, surely it's not just morally correct, but it's legally my obligation to fix that, is it not?
one would have thought this is where regulations come in. And as Silas was saying, there are certain regulations, and somehow or other, people manage to sort of, flirt around them without, they perhaps look at them, but because they've been able to get away with avoiding those particular regulations. That's what the planning's about. When people put in a planning application, they get planning permission, and that in itself should be a regulated aspect of what's going on. And it's quite clear.
Can I drop straight back to Steve? Steve, Christine has gone down the cladding rabbit hole, and she said, "What is the scale of this problem? Is it UK wide? How aware are the general public? Post office scandal made it human, and that's why they eventually did something about it." As I said, the public were outraged because they're emotionally connected to people as a result of the drama. A similar thing is needed here. So let's answer a question. I'm telling you now, Christine, if Steve doesn't know, nobody does. What is the size of the problem by your own estimations?
Right. Well, so the government produced figures basically saying with the cladding, the flammable cladding that we're talking about here, there are around 10,000 buildings around the country.
That's not 10,000 homes. That's 10,000 buildings.
Yes, that's right. So if you multiply that up, it's in the millions. And in addition to that, the government has really cruelly excluded from all protection from ruinous costs of building safety defects around 1.7 million people that have been written out of the law, which protects partially people from some of these ruinous
Who agreed to
costs
that?
going into the tens of thousands of pounds.
To write them out?
That will be Mr. Gove. Now, me and my team and the Earl of Lytton have another approach, which basically adds consumer protection to these remediations, covers all the 1.7 million excluded, covers all the 10,000 buildings, and says if a builder doesn't keep to the law, then they pay. If they don't exist, they use an SPV, their parent companies pay. And if that doesn't exist, then our industry levy pays. The money is coming from somewhere, and that's what needs to happen. It's back in the House of Lords later this year, and we hope the Labour government, who have been heavily briefed on it, will actually finally end this crisis and end the partial remediations with the flammable stuff left on, as we're seeing in my flats, and let's get things done to a proper standard. Let's change the PAS 9980 standard. Remember, it says do not use this if your principal objective is a zero risk to life. So if you're a good builder and you really do want to do it, don't use this standard. And if you're a bad builder, then by all means, So
basically, it's saying if you want people to live long and happy lives, then don't use this. But
don't use the post-Grenfell standard.
How rubbish.
And that's what happened at Grenfell. The problem here is interpretive standards. A builder can get a fire engineer which they can lean on, and they can say, look, I don't think these panels on the fire shaft should come off. I know you might think they should, and we need to ignore the fire advice, the National Fire Chiefs Council. We need to leave this stuff on because we want to save 350 grand. Now, if that's allowed, that's the problem. That's the problem with the standard. We need the Earl of Lytton solutions. It will clean it all up. We can't trust the building regulations. We can't trust builders doing the right thing through choice. We need to make them liable in perpetuity. That's the only reason that we're in this situation, is they're not liable, and that's what we need. And no more interpretations. We need clear, don't put this on. If you stick this on, then you're going to pay in perpetuity. That will clean up the industry, and that's what we're arguing for in the Lords, and that's hopefully where we're going to get to if they pass the law in the Lords and the Commons later this year. And let's hope so, because I think there's a positive end to this, and I think we can achieve it if enough people back what we're doing here.
Hamish, wow.
Well, would
you take us home, please?
Oh, it's certainly. I mean that was what the way Steve ended off there does actually give us some sort of idea that some constructive attention is being put to what is going on, and we've obviously had as a consequence of the fires that we've had in London recently a reinforcement. It is the fact that these came about with that, as we got the information coming through from Grenfell, we know the dangers, and something like the work that the Earl of Lytton's been doing that is going to clear up. And like, I mean, as Chris sort of the various comments he was making, how on earth has all this thing been allowed to happen? And then Silas has reinforced the fact, well, actually, it just does. It's an inherent part of what has been going on in the building industry.
Yes, but I think the problem is that it's one of these tacit things. A few big boys do it, and then you get the trickle down effect that the smaller the smaller actors in this start doing it as well, and before you know it, it's become accepted that it's not a standard at all.
That's right.
It's right.
And Steve and all of these other tens of thousands of people, millions of people in actual fact, are buying in innocence into sort of something they haven't understand the full, if you like. I was going to use the word corrupt, perhaps not. Is that the wrong word? I don't know. But it's certainly something.
I think you could say this: apparently corrupt.
Apparently corrupt. But there's certainly been far too much of that going on, and we are highlighting it. And it's what we have actually seen since we've actually started in our little podcast to try and speak to people and try and get a greater understanding and awareness sort of out there, that there is much more activity surrounding what we're speaking about. And let's hope that continues, and we'll certainly continue until we see more of it.
I cannot emphasize enough that the time is now, guys. We need to keep rattling our sabers about this. We need to keep shoving it up the noses of both the House of Lords, the House of Commons, and, of course, people like Barrett. So they take responsibility. And I'm terrible to say, I hear that Taylor Wimpey have similar issues and a number of other builders too. It has to become a general standard that everyone must follow for this to work well. I want to thank everyone for taking part. Hamish, McLay from Search and Convey, who helped putting this together. Silas Lees Wigram was a great supporter and very knowledgeable on these areas. And of course, Steve Day of buildingsafetyscheme.org, a man who was stuck in place in Royal Artillery Quays and decided, rather than sticking his head in the proverbial sand, to do something about it. And for which I absolutely, my admiration for you is boundless on this, Steve. May you prevail. May you prevail.
Thanks for your support.
And to people who naysay, but occasionally I'm not naming names, but people who naysay about this, keep your head down. You're making things worse. I'm sorry to say, I think you've got to stand up to bullies. If you don't, they prevail, and then it's not just you that's suffering; it's everyone. On that note, before I go, I just wanted to say there is light at the end of the tunnel. Good sense is becoming the norm. We're coming out of that period of 10 years where alternative facts seem to be the way forward. I think honesty, truth, authenticity is becoming seen as a new currency, and long may that continue.
Absolutely.
I wanted to end this on a positive light. If it wasn't for Steve, perhaps we wouldn't be heading there, but we are heading there. And I'm saying to everyone who is listening, everyone is watching, get on this train. It's well worth it, and you'll feel better for it, frankly. It's good for your mental health. You certainly feel morally better. Christine, thank you so much for your contribution. I love it when people actually get it. It's great. When the penny drops, and tell other people, this is what needs to change. You can't have any, not a little bit, any, none, a tiny bit is too much. It all has to come off. We have to make these damn things so that firefighters are willing to go in there. Glass that instantly shatters the moment you walk in, plastic panels that catch fire in the place that's supposed to be separated from where the fire is. Mindless. Anyway, all right, I'm going to calm down, getting off my orange box. All right, I'm off now. I'm off. To all you listening, thank you for bearing with us. Try and keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars, but look after that mental health. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Bye-bye now.